What's up, everybody? Welcome to today's edition of Everyday Discipline, where we decode, deconstruct, and reverse engineer self-discipline for you to get whatever it is you want in your life. It is one of the core traits that you've got to have in order to find success in this world is self-discipline. Of course, there are more traits, but discipline is really the key one, because if you've got this, you're going to consistently do the work that you know you need to do in order to produce whatever result you need to have. My name is Brent Kokel. I am your host. As always, thank you so much for investing a little bit of your bandwidth here on me. We live in a very, very chaotic world that consistently competes for our attention. Everything is competing for our attention, and because you're taking a few minutes here to be with me on this show, I genuinely appreciate you having your attention here for the time being. So one of the things that is going down for me right now is my kids and their schooling and my part in their schooling. And it's interesting to see how this was, because, I don't know about you guys, but when I would go home from school, my dad would always help me with my homework. And he was in public education. He was an administrator. He'd been a teacher, and then he was a vice principal, and then a principal, and then an educational consultant after that when he got into the private sector. And he would always have me do my homework with him. And the thing that pissed me off the most was I just wanted the answer, especially with math. I sucked at math in high school. And I sucked at math in college too. I actually failed out of the business school at Arizona State because I could not do college level calculus. Ended up graduating with a degree in broadcast journalism. But I've been pretty successful in business because it turns out you don't need business calculus in order to be good at business. All you need is multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. But the key is to understand how to apply it in the exact right way. But my dad would always do homework with me, but he'd always do this painstaking process where I would have to figure out the answer on my own. Oh no, wait a second, I had to learn something. It was terrible. So now I find myself in the exact same situation where, particularly with my daughter, she just wants the answer. And I'm not going to give her the answer because that's not how it works. So she had a spelling test last week, like she does every single week. And before we did this, right, she wanted me to test her. She wanted me to go through it with her. She had a list of spelling words that were all very, very similar in how they sounded and somewhat similar in meaning. And the way that it was laid out in the practice was you had definition and word. And so she just wanted me to read the definition and then she would tell me the word, but sometimes I would tell her the word so she would then have to tell me the definition because that meant she'd actually understand it instead of just memorize it, which is the trouble so much with school. Like, school hasn't changed since I've been in school. It's basically a pattern of, can you memorize this information rather than do you understand this information? Very, very different things there. And so I'm mixing it up and she's getting frustrated about this whole thing. But we spent about 30 minutes just on mnemonic devices to help her remember words and meanings, things that rhymed, things that she could associate with different words. And I was trying to figure out a bunch of different ways to have Taylor Swift songs be associated with different words for her because she would remember the shit out of those things. But what was interesting was I watched the body language that she had during this. And again, we spent about 30 minutes on this on a Thursday night. She had a spelling test on a Friday. She was super unconfident when we started. You could tell she was shifting in her chair. She was looking off all over the place and just kind of slumped down. And by the end of the 30 minutes, she was sitting up straight. She was looking me in the eye. She was doing exactly what I was hoping that she would do, which is becoming excited because she was getting it. She was engaged in figuring out how this whole thing was going to go down. Here's the deal in this. It's not a lesson about spelling. It's not a lesson about parenting. Well, it's kind of a lesson about parenting. It's the time that you invest in people is the payoff. That's the lesson for the day. The time that you invest in people is the payoff. I've been thinking a lot about charity lately and what it is that I give. And I recognize I've been thinking about it in entirely the wrong way. I've been thinking about service in general entirely the wrong way because I've come to recognize, and a lot through reading the Bible, that the highest level of humanity is those who provide service to others. Which is interesting because when you look at society, what do we tend to think? We tend to think that the people providing the service are somehow on the lower level. Because if I put let's say a lawyer or a doctor next to a server at a restaurant, which one would you tell me would have the higher status? Chances are you'd say the lawyer or the doctor, and I get it. They've got more education, they probably make more money and all of that. But you think about a server, like that is just the core level of service. Now, granted, a doctor and a lawyer are serving people at different levels, but it's not in their title. They're doing their work. But service in and of itself is the absolute highest level of humanity that we can have. When we're doing something for somebody else and investing time specifically in them, then that is ultimately where you feel like you're most on purpose, like where you're doing the best work. At least I know that's the case for me. And again, I was thinking about charity all wrong. And I've been thinking about it wrong for now 42 years, because I'm 43 now and I just started getting this. So maybe 42 and a half years. Really, it's about this. I used to think that if I wrote a check with a couple of zeros on it, that was doing what I needed to do. Organizations would come, they would ask me for a donation, I would give them a donation, and that's it. But is that really what they needed? Like, was that my highest and best service to those people? No, you know what? Really, it wasn't. Because that was my half-ass effort to just say, okay, cool, I did something. I'm gonna feel good about the fact that I wrote these guys, a $3,000 check, $5,000, $10,000 check. But the reality of it is that I could have done so much more had I volunteered my time. I remember a couple years ago specifically, it was, I forget what the donation I made was, but it was to a boys and girls club. So, boys and girls that don't have strong parental guidance in their lives, or maybe they don't have parents and they're orphans, after school programs, stuff like that. And I remember writing them a check. And it's like, man, what they really needed from me was they needed me to go there a couple days a week after school and just be with them and guide them and just share my perspective on life. It's really, really interesting. Like, to think about service in that way is like how you could serve. The highest level of service is you and your time and what you give to other people, especially when you've got an abundance of it. And I happen to be in a spot in my life where I've finally figured out how not to work, like not to have a day in, day out, 9 to 5 responsibility type of job. I work when I want to work, and I've got the time. So I could be doing this. And that's what I think about when I think about charity now. I think about, how can I help this person? And I look at it, and like, one of my missions on a daily basis is to make 7 people smile. Because I feel like that's in service too. If I can make 7 people smile in a day, then that did something for those 7 people. And in theory, they're going to go on and have a better day and maybe make some other people smile. And like, that feels good. Like, when I think about this, like in my core 4 domains, body, being, balance, and business, this is like being. But this is also really applicable to balance too, isn't it? It's like, let's say that you've been working a lot, like working a ton. You've been putting in 10 to 12 hour days, and you haven't been with your family very much, and your wife's starting to get a little pissy about this, and so you send her on a shopping spree. Hey babe, go buy whatever you want. The red bottom shoes, like nice bags, like whatever, you just go buy stuff. That's not really what she needs from you, is it? No, because it's like, why wouldn't you spend a long weekend with her? Or why wouldn't you commit to getting home earlier? Somehow figuring out how to prioritize stuff differently in your work. This is something that is ultra powerful, is you and your presence and your time. Because I feel like, to some extent, men in our society, we've been brainwashed to think that really our job in the home and in our families is to make the money. And that's pretty much it. As long as we're doing that, everything is on point. But I've been challenging people lately to say, like, what if all your wife wanted was you? Like, your time, your presence, your perspective. What if that's all she wanted? And the same type of thing goes with all the different organizations, because everybody seems to be, like, there's all different organizations that seem to be asking for one thing, which is donations of either time or money. Now, what if those organizations, what if all they wanted was you? They didn't want your cash, and you just gave of yourself to them. I wonder how that changes your life. Because one of the things that I've come to believe is an absolute fact is that to get, you just give. You give relentlessly. And you don't expect anything to come back to you. That's not what it's about. But when you give relentlessly, things do come back to you. It's like the magic of the universe. So my challenge for you today is not a self-perspective thing, which is what we normally do, but my challenge for you today is to be of service to one person with your time, not with your cash. That might mean a phone call to your mom. That might mean coming home 15 minutes earlier to be with your family. I don't know what that means for you because everybody's life is different. Your life is different. But my challenge for you is to be of service to one person by giving them your time. However, you need to go about doing that. I know what I'm going to do. I've got an uncle that I don't see very often, even though he lives in the same town. He's kind of the black sheep of our family, so he's really difficult to get along with. And he doesn't get around very well. He had a knee replacement a few years ago. And so I know what I'm going to do. This week, I'm going to go pick him up and I'm going to take him to the grocery store because otherwise it's really hard for him to get there. He doesn't drive, he can't walk too well, and that's kind of how he's doing it. So I'm going to go pick him up and I'm going to take him to the grocery store. That's what I'm going to do. You do what you need to do to be of service to somebody else. All right, guys, that's it. That's the show for the day, everybody. Hey, if you know somebody that you feel like needed to hear this message, share this show with them. Just copy the link, text it to them, and let them hear what they need to hear inside of this episode. If you guys would do that, I would be greatly appreciative. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to do my job and come back next time. I want you to do your job, and you come back too.